The room hummed with an almost palpable stillness, broken only by the faint tick of the wall clock. It wasn't the comfortable silence of love, it was the absence of conversation, of connection. I sat curled in the corner of the couch, staring blankly at the muted television screen, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Mike, my husband of 28 years, was at his usual spot, reclined in his armchair, engrossed in his phone. The space between us felt vast, heavy with years of unspoken words and unshared moments. The house had always been my sanctuary. Its warm wooden floors, sun-drenched kitchen, and the faint smell of lavender from the backyard garden were things I cherished. Yet lately, it had started to feel like a museum, beautiful, but empty of life. I missed the warmth, the laughter, the fire that used to light up this place. I missed him, or at least the version of him I fell in love with. But it wasn't just him, was it? Somewhere along the line, I had let myself become a shadow of the vibrant woman I once was. The realization hit me in small moments, like when I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My skin still glowed, my hair was still thick, but the spark, the mischievous glint that had always defined me, had dimmed. I shifted in my seat, glancing over at Mike. His face, illuminated by the glow of his phone, was calm and focused. Once, that face had been my universe, his touch electric, his gaze enough to send shivers down my spine. Now, he felt like a stranger who simply shared my space. The cup trembled in my hands as I made a decision. I couldn't let this silence consume us, consume me. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of rebellion, a seed of an idea so outrageous it made my pulse quicken. I didn't just want my marriage back, I wanted myself back. And I was ready to fight for both. The thought had been simmering in the back of my mind for days, stubborn and unrelenting. It came in whispers at first, teasing me during the quietest moments, while folding laundry or rinsing dishes. At first, I laughed it off, dismissing it as a ridiculous, fleeting fantasy. But the more I thought about it, the more it took shape, solidifying into something thrilling, something possible that I needed, something bold, something unpredictable. A jolt to the system, to remind both Mike and me that we were still alive, still capable of desire. The idea came to me in a late-night haze, a stray thought scrolling past an online article about rekindling romance. But as I dug deeper, searching for inspiration, I stumbled upon something entirely unexpected, a woman named Claire. Her website promised evenings of unforgettable intimacy, sensual dances designed to awaken dormant connections between partners. I hesitated, staring at the screen, my finger hovering over the mouse. Claire wasn't what you'd call conventional. She exuded confidence, grace, and a daring sensuality that made me both nervous and intrigued. What would Mike think? Would he laugh at me? Would he think I'd lost my mind? The uncertainty made my stomach twist, but my heart pounded with a kind of excitement I hadn't felt in years. I clicked contact before I could second-guess myself, filling out the inquiry form with trembling fingers. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with her response, polite, professional, and confident in her ability to guide couples toward rediscovering their connection. The anticipation was intoxicating. That I didn't tell Mike. Not yet. Instead, I set the plan in motion, scheduling Claire for an evening when I knew he'd be home, unsuspecting. I spent the next day preparing, polishing the house, selecting a dress that reminded me of my younger self, and setting the table for a candlelit dinner. As I typed out the final confirmation email, I hesitated for only a second. Then I hit send, my pulse racing. It was crazy, yes, but maybe crazy was exactly what we needed. The doorbell rang just as I lit the last candle on the dining table. My heart leapt, not just from the sound, but from what it signified. I smoothed the front of my dress, took a steadying breath, and went to answer it. Claire stood on the other side of the door, every bit as magnetic in person as she had seemed online. Her presence was impossible to ignore, confident, elegant, and radiating an effortless charm. She wore a fitted black dress that moved like liquid silk, and her smile was warm but knowing. "Hi, you must be Claire," I said, my voice catching slightly. "That's me," she replied, her tone smooth and reassuring. "Ready for a memorable evening?" Behind me, I could hear Mike shuffling into the living room, his footsteps hesitant. I gestured for her to come in, my pulse racing as I turned to him. Mike stood in the doorway, his brows furrowed. "Who's this?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "This is Claire," I said, my tone calm but firm. "She's here to help us. I thought we could use something special tonight." He opened his mouth, clearly unsure how to respond, but Claire's easy laugh broke the tension. "Don't worry," she said, stepping closer with an open, graceful demeanor. "I specialize in creating experiences that bring couples closer. Just trust me." I watched as she unpacked a small speaker and selected a soft, jazzy tune that filled the room. Her movements were deliberate, fluid, almost hypnotic. She began to sway to the rhythm, her arms arching gracefully, inviting us into her world. Mike's expression shifted from skepticism to curiosity, his eyes following her as if caught in a spell. I settled on the couch, unsure whether to be a participant or a spectator, but Claire turned to me with a knowing smile. "Relax," she said softly. "This is about both of you." As she moved closer to Mike, her presence transformed the room. The tension that had hung between us for years began to dissolve. Replaced by something warm, sweet, and alive, the music shifted, the rhythm deepening into something sultry, deliberate. Claire's movements mirrored the beat, slow, controlled, and magnetic. She drifted closer to Mike, her body swaying with a grace that was almost otherworldly. Mike, usually so composed, seemed captivated, his hands gripping the armrest of the couch as though anchoring himself. I watched him, and for the first time in years, I saw something flicker in his eyes, a spark of curiosity, a longing he didn't know how to name. It wasn't jealousy I felt as I watched Claire, it was exhilaration. Her confidence was infectious, her gestures fluid and unself-conscious. She wasn't pulling Mike away from me. If anything, she was stirring something in him that I had been trying to reach for years. Then she turned her gaze to me, her dark eyes warm and inviting, and extended her hand. "Come closer," she said, her voice as smooth as the music. I hesitated, a thousand thoughts tumbling through my mind. But her smile coaxed me forward, dissolving my doubts. I stood and moved toward her, feeling Mike's gaze shift to me. My skin tingled under his watchful eyes as I took Claire's hand. She guided me, her touch light but sure, and before I realized it, I was swaying with her, our movements weaving into the music. The sensation was intoxicating, the closeness, the shared rhythm, the way her presence drew me out of myself. Mike was leaning forward now, his expression unreadable but intense. Claire smiled, her voice low as she murmured, "Let's make this a moment for all of us." She stepped closer to Mike, her fingertips brushing his shoulder. He stiffened, but only for a moment, his gaze darting to me as if asking for permission. I nodded, feeling an unexpected rush of boldness. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice trembling with anticipation. Claire's touch became more deliberate, her movements drawing us both in. The tension in the room shifted, thickening into something electric. I felt alive, as though we were all caught in an unspoken dance, a seductive game that was just beginning. The space between us blurred as Claire's fingers trailed from Mike's shoulder to his hand, gently pulling him to his feet. His breath hitched, audible even over the music, and I watched as he stood, hesitant but intrigued. She glanced at me with a knowing smile and extended her free hand toward me. My heart pounded, my skin prickling with a mixture of nerves and excitement. I took it, letting her draw me closer until the three of us formed a loose circle. Her touch was light, her movements fluid, as if she were guiding us through something choreographed but utterly spontaneous. I felt her fingers graze mine, her warmth radiating through me. Then she turned to Mike, her smile soft, inviting. "This isn't just about the dance," she murmured, her voice low, like velvet. "It's about feeling present, connected. Trust each other, let go." I watched as her hand rested briefly on Mike's chest, just above his heart, and he exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing. His gaze flicked to me, searching, and I stepped closer, placing my hand over Claire's. Beneath my palm, I could feel the steady thrum of Mike's heartbeat. Time seemed to slow as we moved together, tentative at first, then bolder. Claire's hands guided mine, her presence bridging the unspoken gaps between us. Her touch was deliberate, her movements hypnotic, and I felt an unexpected heat rise within me as her arm brushed mine. Mike's eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw desire there, not just for Claire, but for me, too. My breath caught as I realized this wasn't just her moment, it was ours. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. Feel each other. Let it be natural. My hand slid from Mike's chest to his arm, tracing the familiar lines of his muscles. His fingers twitched, and then, as if breaking free from invisible chains, he wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me closer. Claire stepped back slightly, her presence still grounding us, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. The boundaries between us dissolved, and in that moment, it felt like we were rediscovering not just each other, but ourselves. The music pulsed softly in the background, a rhythm that seemed to echo the energy now coursing through the room. Mike's hand lingered on my waist, his touch both familiar and thrillingly new. Claire's presence, though quiet now, still shaped the moment, like a sculptor patiently revealing art beneath the marble. I caught her gaze as she moved slightly to the side, her expression warm, her lips curved in a smile that felt like permission. The air between us shimmered with an intensity one hadn't felt in years. Mike's eyes were on me, searching, cautious but eager, as though he were seeing me for the first time in decades. My fingers, trembling with the rush of emotions, trailed along his jawline, feeling the roughness of his stubble against my skin. It was such a simple act, but it carried a weight I hadn't realized I needed to lift. Claire shifted closer, her hand brushing mine, her touch gentle yet deliberate. Don't overthink it, she whispered, her breath warm against my cheek. Just let yourself feel. I turned toward her, the sudden closeness sparking something undeniable. Her fingers intertwined with mine, her touch light yet grounding. The movement was so natural, as if she'd always been part of our lives. Mike hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly as he watched us, but there was no judgment in his gaze, only wonder, curiosity, and a growing hunger that mirrored my own. Claire reached for him, placing her hand over his, guiding him toward me. The three of us stood there, connected in a way that defied explanation. My pulse thundered in my ears as I felt their warmth, their presence, their willingness to dive into this uncharted territory. Mike leaned closer, his lips brushing against my temple, soft and hesitant. At the same time, Claire's fingers grazed my arm, her touch electric. What began as a tentative exploration became a flood, an undeniable wave of emotions and sensations that engulfed us. In that moment, nothing else existed, only the three of us, tangled in something that felt impossibly right. The room seemed to hum with a life of its own, the soft glow of candlelight flickering against the walls as we moved in sync, guided by instinct more than thought. It was a dance without choreography, a language of touch, breath, and unspoken promises. Claire's hand slid from mine, her movements graceful as she circled us, her presence magnetic. She wasn't just a part of the moment, she orchestrated it, her gaze and touch weaving us together like strands in a tapestry. Mike's hands found my waist again, this time with more confidence. The years we'd spent together seemed to vanish, replaced by the fresh thrill of discovery. His eyes searched mine, and in their depths, I saw something raw and honest, a spark I had almost forgotten. Claire moved closer, her arm brushing mine, her warmth a steady pulse between us. Her smile was inviting, almost playful, as she leaned in, her voice a murmur. Let go. Trust what you feel. I didn't think, didn't analyze. Instead, I surrendered to the moment, letting my hands trail over Mike's chest, rediscovering the contours of a man I thought I knew. His breath hitched as I leaned closer, brushing my lips lightly against his cheek, my skin tingling where it met his. Claire's fingers grazed my arm, her touch electrifying. She was near, her presence both grounding and exhilarating. When she moved closer to Mike, her touch equally light and intentional, I saw him respond, not with hesitation, but with curiosity. Her gaze shifted to me, a silent question in her eyes, and I nodded, my heart pounding. She smiled, stepping back slightly, as though giving us permission to take the lead. In that moment, the three of us were bound by something far greater than the sum of our actions. Every movement, every touch was deliberate, passionate, and free of hesitation. It wasn't just a dance, it was a symphony, and I had never felt so alive. The world outside ceased to exist. Time folded in on itself, leaving only the three of us suspended in this charged, intoxicating moment. Each movement, every touch, felt deliberate yet instinctive, as though our bodies knew a secret language that words couldn't capture. Mike's hands, once tentative, now moved with purpose, rediscovering me as if I were something new. His fingers traced my spine, sending shivers cascading through me, each one more exhilarating than the last. I met his gaze, and what I saw there made my breath catch. Desire, yes, but also gratitude and wonder. Claire was the pulse between us, her movements fluid as she wove her presence seamlessly into ours. Her touch was gentle yet igniting, like sparks catching fire. She leaned close, her breath warm against my skin, her fingertips grazing the curve of my shoulder before retreating, leaving a trail of heat in their wake. I glanced at her, feeling the strength of her confidence, the ease with which she carried herself. She met my eyes with a soft, knowing smile, as though she could see the awakening happening inside me, the walls breaking down, the vulnerability taking shape. Mike reached for her then, his hand brushing her arm, a gesture both curious and inviting. She accepted without hesitation, her body leaning into his touch with a graceful ease. It didn't feel strange or wrong, it felt like freedom, like permission to explore the depths of ourselves without judgment. As the three of us moved together, the lines between us blurred. The music played on, a soft melody that seemed to amplify the electricity coursing through the air. My senses were heightened, every sound, every breath, every shift of weight against my skin felt magnified, more vivid than I ever thought possible. I lost myself in it, in the rhythm, the warmth, the undeniable connection. For the first time in years, I felt wholly alive, wholly me, without fear, without hesitation. Just being. The atmosphere was charged, every touch and movement dissolving the years of distance that had built between us. It was as though the three of us were caught in a tide, pulled together by something far greater than desire, something raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. Mike's hand found mine, his grip firm yet tender, a silent reassurance that this wasn't just a fleeting moment for him. His eyes, filled with an intensity one hadn't seen in years, met mine, and in that gaze, I felt everything, love, longing, and a deep, unspoken gratitude. Claire was no longer an outsider but part of our rhythm. Her presence bridged the gaps we hadn't even realized existed, her touch guiding us both towards something profound. Her fingertips skimmed across my arm, a whisper of sensation that sent a ripple of warmth through me. She turned to Mike, her smile soft but inviting, and I saw him respond, his own barriers lowering as he reached for her. The three of us moved like a single entity, connected in ways I never thought possible. Claire's touch grounded me, while Mike's touch reminded me of the fire we once had. Between the two of them, I felt seen, cherished, and desired, not just as a wife, but as a woman. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The weight of expectation, the years of routine, the boundaries we'd grown accustomed to, all of it melted away. There was only us, and the quiet understanding that this wasn't just about passion, it was about rediscovery. As Claire leaned close, her breath warm against my neck, her hand briefly brushing mine, I felt a surge of gratitude for her presence, for her ability to create this moment. Mike's arm wrapped around my waist, anchoring me to him, and as I leaned into his warmth, I realized we weren't just merging our bodies, we were merging our souls, rekindling something we thought we'd lost forever. When it was over, the room fell into a stillness so profound it felt like the world itself had paused. The candles flickered gently, their glow casting soft shadows on the walls, and the music had long since faded into silence. The three of us sat together on the couch, our bodies close, our breaths slowly evening out. Mike leaned back, his hand resting lightly on my leg, his fingers absently tracing circles against my skin. I glanced at him, and the expression on his face took my breath away. He looked lighter, as though a weight had been lifted, his eyes brimming with something unspoken but deeply meaningful. Claire sat on my other side, her presence still radiant but calm now, as if she knew her work here was done. Her hand brushed mine one last time, a silent acknowledgement of the journey we had shared. Her smile was warm, a knowing glint in her eyes as she glanced between Mike and me. I let my head rest against Mike's shoulder, my heart swelling with emotions too vast to name. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, my senses still tingling with the echoes of what we'd shared. But more than that, I felt connected, not just to Mike, but to myself, to the vibrant, daring woman I thought I'd lost. I don't know what to say, Mike murmured, breaking the silence at last. His voice was low, his words tentative. You don't have to, I replied softly, squeezing his hand. We were here. That's enough. Claire stood, her movements graceful, and I knew it was her way of saying goodbye. She didn't need to speak, her presence had already said everything. As the door closed behind her, Mike and I stayed where we were, the silence between us no longer heavy or empty, but full of understanding, hope, and a rekindled love that had been waiting for this moment. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew this, I wasn't afraid anymore. We were ready to begin again. Together. Thanks for being with me during the story. Don't forget to subscribe to the Nasty Talks channel, and like the video.